Hello there, folks, and welcome to BankBank's Gamedev Efforts of 2021 Recap. So let's get this started. The first thing is Bonky Trek Quimdung Edition for Windows came out on Steam in March. So this was a culmination of a long-time goal to get this basically 10-year-old game on Steam into gamers' hands. It hadn't been available, so I cleaned it up, sent it on its way, and as predicted, it's performed quite nicely. It's been a solid piece of the Steam portfolio. It's been the best performing product there. Next was Triple Dungeon, and this was basically the opposite of Bonky Trek. This was a half-assed port based on a somewhat interesting idea. What if I took an old mobile game, which takes up only 1/3 width of the screen, and turned it into playing the same game 3 times simultaneously? So this has not even made back the $100 Steam fee, almost, so it was worth a try. And then we come to Jubilain. This is something I'm very proud of, the capping off of BankBank's puzzle trilogy, which started with Cave Sweeper and continued with Tesselated. So I'm very pleased to have been able to work with such talented people, such as Steph and Leomi Sadler. Big shout out to Julian Sicaldi as well. And thanks to Geophage for some very good game design insight, which ended up in new features that really helped the game. So of course, Jubilain has been a total commercial flop, which isn't a big surprise. The probability of success was around 15%. It also took a huge amount of time to complete considering the vast number of features, including a first ever for me, online verse play. And now we're moving on to Mega Drive Genesis development. So the first project, I started a Panel Dupont Tetris Attack clone maybe back in March. I put some work into it, or maybe it was January, I don't know, and then I abandoned it around March, something like that. So then I took it back up kind of recently and put in a lot of work over the last several months, but I've put that project on hold because Panel Dupont specifically, as you probably know, you can still manipulate the board as matches are going off, and I think it's an order of magnitude more complicated than a game like Pio, for example, where once the chain starts going off, the player has no control. So, like I started working on it in January, I put it down in March, I started working on it again in maybe November, then I put it down. So at some point I'm going to resume that project. The next project I've been working on is a Cleopatra Fortune-esque game for Sega Genesis, and big thanks to Kay Cowolf, who provided me with the matching logic code. Without that, I might not have been able to do it myself, because I understand it conceptually, but it's a little bit complicated. So my thesis, my idea here is that instead of having these tiny well widths, and I've gone over this in one of my puzzle series videos, instead of having a 6 wide or 7 wide well width, or 10 in the case of Tetris, why don't we take up the entire screen and let 2 people play simultaneously on one board? And in the case of Cleopatra Fortune, why don't we let them play cooperatively, so either placing tiles at the same time or taking turns to kind of build as big as they can make it and see what kind of scores they can get, and just kind of maybe a fun party game-esque type of thing. So that's made some pretty good progress. I'm pretty close to having the engine fully working, so maybe it'll be out on... I'm aiming to put it out on Steam as an experiment to see what a Mega Drive ROM package with an emulator will do for numbers on Steam, and then down the road after that do a special version, like updated version with new content, new modes on a physical cart release. So we'll see what happens with that. Now moving on to ROM hacking, game hacks. So let's start with ones that I finished. So the first was a Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo rebalancing. Using the modified drop patterns of Serlin's HD remix kind of as a base, I sought to change up the game balance. Online competitive play, if you don't know, basically centers around Ken mirror matches. And I was eager to see how different the game's meta could become with different gem drop patterns for garbage for each character, as well as modifying the damage percentage. Like, for example, Akuma does only 75% of whatever attack he does. So if you do a 10, it sends 7 or 8. So we rebalanced those ratios. So this was my very first ROM hacking project, and I have to give a huge thanks to VMP Kyle W. for teaching me so much about Ghidra and 68K assembly, and I think using a debugger. And this project really opened my eyes to how computers work. I mean, this is a very valuable lesson to me as a developer and as a person who's used computers for many, many years. And more thanks to the Puzzle Wednesday crew, without whom I would not have undertaken this project. Their ideas and testing helped the project to become completed. An important lesson I learned regarding ROM hacking and two-player competitive games: it's really hard to get people to play new and different versions of their favorite games. Like, nobody really plays, this changed version that I did, and especially because a short time after I basically finished my version of the ROM hack, someone else from the Puzzle Wednesday community came along and did a better job. So shout outs to Cato Sinclair. But I still get the impression that basically nobody is playing even their hack. So people they want to keep playing Ken Mirrors, and for this for this genre, it makes sense that people like Magical Drop. If you don't know, the competitive community of Magical Drop only plays mirror matches. So the match changes based on which character both of them pick, but you get the picture. So the next project, I started this in August, was the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 Naomi ratio hack. After the initial success, I guess you could call it that, of me being able to finish the Puzzle Fighter hack, I wanted to try something more challenging, and at some point I had stumbled across a ratio tier list devised by fighting game great Justin Wong, where he separates the characters into point costs and gives a player just 7 points to assemble a team. This concept intrigued me, taking an old fighting game with a well-established meta and changing it into a brand new game where players had to think strategically about the synergies of their teams and how best to spend their limited points. So I jumped headfirst into messing around with the Hitachi SH4 CPU, fairly different from the Motorola 68K CPU of Puzzle Fighter in many ways. And after a week or so, I was able to implement Justin Wong's cost list logic directly into the game. And then another week was spent commandeering the text printing engine of the game in order to display to the players the cost of each character and the remaining points that they had. It was at this point that I realized the MAME ROM set which I had been working on wouldn't be playable in Null DC Bear, which at the time, in September 2021, was still the primary way to play Naomi online. Flycast would be releasing very shortly after, but as I wasn't aware of this information, I realized I would need to port the hack from MAME's ROM set format to the bin list format used by Null DC Bear. Rawson X, the Bear dev, was super helpful in this regard. So because I was doing the debugging in MAME and Null DC Bear doesn't have a debugger, basically I was flying blind in doing the porting, and then I had to change stuff and fix stuff and implement new stuff. So it was basically like flying an airplane without having really any instruments, or driving a car without being able to see out the window. But I released it. There was a bug, and then after 2 quick revisions, on September 11th, the final and correct version of the mod was released. And I have to be honest, I kind of expected it to be better received than it was. Justin Wong seemingly never played it, at least not on his stream. J.M. Croft's a big Marvel YouTube guy, played it a couple times, and then reverted back to just playing vanilla Marvel 2 with the ratio constraints not imposed in logic but by the players themselves. So the biggest success is that Maximilian Dude played the mod on several occasions, producing 4 videos of him playing it, so that was nice. And it seems like there's still people playing it on Fightcade. It got added to Fightcade, thankfully. But I could never get Flycast match observing or replays to work personally, so I have yet to really be able to dig into the content that I made the mod for. I want to see these people playing. So that's kind of a bummer. So next was I moved on to a similar project, KOF 98 ratio. So on the SRK wiki, I came across a Chinese-developed cost points list for KOF 98. Recognizing that I would be able to observe matches and replays for KOF 98 in Fightcade, because the FB Neo works for me for those functions, I thought this would be a good ratio system follow-up project, so kind of re-implementing the same sort of system in a different CPU for the 68K. I had some familiarity with this CPU as well from the Puzzle Fighter project, so I figured it would be pretty easy to tackle. And so after about 3 weeks of on-again, off-again work, I had completed the project, including the logic and the text display. And the only incomplete aspect, if you could call it that, was the omission of the roulette random character select function. I obviously could not leave it untouched, as it could allow for teams which exceeded each character's 20-point allotment. So the roulette function in Ghidra seemed very complicated, and so I basically opted to just simply disable it. And also one interesting aspect, in Justin Wong's tier list for Marvel 2, there is a 0-point character roll. So if you use up all your points on the first and second character, you can still make a valid team. However, in the cost point list for KOF 98, there is no 0-point character. The lowest is Brian Battler at 2 points. And so what I had to do with the logic is on the player's second pick, I had to temporarily remove 2 of their points, because if like each character gets 20 points. If I use 12 on my first character with Chizuru and then 8 on my second character with somebody that costs 8, I now have to pick one more character. I have no points and there's no 0-point character, so it's a soft lock. So if you're on your second pick and you have 8 points still, you can only use 6 of those points. So that is probably pretty unintuitive for a lot of people, but I mean, what was the other choice? Make Brian battle or 2 points? So anyway, I completed that. Kind of a bummer that it doesn't seem like anyone's played it yet. I sent it to a couple people on Discord. I sent it to the FB Neo team, who was great, very friendly people, and I think they added the hack to FB Neo. Still hasn't been added to Fightcade. I also sent it to YZKOF, which is a big Chinese online KOF platform, and they don't seem to be interested at all. They didn't add it. As far as I know, they didn't respond. They responded to my email saying thank you, and then that was nothing else. So, another kind of bummer that it's not being used, especially considering how popular of a game that is, but c'est la vie. So now moving on to unfinished and probably abandoned hacks. First of all, after this, I started working, maybe in September-ish, October-ish, I started working on a hack for Senno, which is a very extremely obscure puzzle game played by the Puzzle Wednesday people, sometimes, rarely. So I was curious because this hardware, it runs on the SH2 Hitachi CPU, which is basically the same as the Dreamcast Naomi CPU, so I knew I had some familiarity. And I was interested because Senno, as a puzzle arcade game, only has 1 rotate button. So I thought, maybe I can hack in, and it's a quick and easy job, hack in a counterclockwise rotate, a second rotate button. So I analyzed the input function of the arcade hardware, and sure enough, it picked up the second and third buttons in hardware. They just weren't mapped to anything in the game. So that was a pretty quick fix or change. So I added that in. So it has a counterclockwise rotation. The animation that plays makes it still kind of look like a clockwise rotation, but logically it does work correct. And then I started implementing more and more and more features. I made this to-do list. And so one of them was, so for example, for Fightcade ranked play, to have detectors, you need static memory addresses, which this game doesn't have. So I hacked that in. I did a bunch of stuff. However, I could never figure out how the DAS works. So basically, if you are using left and right, like you hold left on the stick and then you press rotate while you're moving left, it'll stop your moving. So it's like one stream of input. And a hack that was requested was to separate these into separate streams so that one wouldn't interrupt another. And I just couldn't figure it out. I mean, I could eventually if I banged my head against the wall, but I figured. And ultimately, the thing is, nobody cares about this game. Nobody really ever even played the progress that I made. It doesn't matter. It was a total foolish waste of time, but I mean, it wasn't the biggest project. I learned some stuff. And then finally, last is Street Fighter 3 Third Strike widescreen. So as you probably know, or may know, Street Fighter 3 Second Impact has a built-in widescreen mode that you can enable that makes the game 16:9. It changes the HUD, it changes the width of the battlefield, whatever you want to call it. Third Strike has some of this code enabled, as does vanilla Street Fighter 3. But in Third Strike, you need a hack to enable it. It's not in the menu. And then if you do enable it, the players are still confined to the same 4:3 width. So it just makes the background a little bit longer on each side. So I figured, hey, I can try this out because, yet again, this is an SH2 CPU game like the Naomi. I mean, that's SH4, but basically the same thing. So very quickly, after maybe a couple days, I hacked the boundaries to fill up the whole 16:9 playfield. And then the other 2 things to hack were the HUD, and there's some graphical glitches, like some pop in, pop out, and some, like on the edge of Ryu stage, there's black stuff. So the HUD stuff has to be fixed to make it an elegant, nice product. And the way that they're called SS tiles in Capcom CPS3. The way that they're set up and loaded is really complicated and tedious, and working with them was really annoying. And I started to feel like, I'm going to put in so much time working with this really annoying system of getting all these tiles to align properly, and nobody's going to play this, and I will have wasted my time, so why bother? And, I felt like I had made a lot of good progress because you may or may not know CPS3 is pretty complicated. It's got encryption. The ROMs are interleaved amongst 4 different files, so I had people help me and provide me with some useful Python code that I put all these batch files together. So like if I need to make an edit, then I just press one button, and it decrypts, puts them into 4 different files, re-encrypts, puts it back into one file, or you know what I'm saying. But anyway, it's unfinished. You know, you can see that the boundaries work. I think this could, maybe people would play it, maybe not. But you know, the Third Strike community, they're not probably like these other games. They don't care about jumping into a 16 by 9 whatever game. So maybe I'll finish it. It would be great if there was like one person that was interested in working on it with me that had skills, and I could give them the progress that I had made and work on it with them or something like that. But anyway, so last work in progress hack, I got really into playing this puzzle game from '95 called Senkyu, aka Battle Balls. It's a hexagonal based grid. You know, most of these games in this genre, like Puyo Puyo, are a square grid. So somebody in a Tetris Attack Discord in the dev channel made an interesting observation that for a hexagonal grid, the lose condition is that basically the entire field needs to be filled up, whereas with a Puyo square grid, only one column needs to be filled up. So that stuck in my mind. I said, wow, you know, I had known about this game for years, never really paid attention to it, and I started trying it, and it's really fun. I'm really into it. So my idea is just to hack. It's an arcade game and a PS1 port, and the PS1 port, I'm trying to change the graphics so that instead of spheres, they're the actual hexagons that make up the game board. So I'm in Ghidra. I'm messing with the PS1 binary. It uses these overlays. So I'm just a work in progress on that. It's hard to find time. And also, failing that, I think both in the emulators Mednafen and DuckStation, you can dump VRAM textures and then replace them. So potentially I haven't looked at it yet because I've been busy. I could dump out the VRAM texture for the game tiles and then just modify them and then load them using whatever replacement function those emulators have, and that might do it. I mean, it's not the most elegant solution. It won't work on real hardware, for example. But I just am really interested to see how those hexagons look instead of spheres, which don't really necessarily accurately represent the gameplay. And then very finally, this game, Senkyu Battle Balls, interestingly enough, runs the arcade hardware is not 68K. It's not Hitachi Super H. It's Intel 386, 32-bit. So, you know, you can decompile the arcade executable once it's been decrypted. This SPI, Seibu SPI hardware has heavy-duty encryption, like harder than CPS3 from what I read. But anyway, if you run it in MAME, it decrypts it, and then you can dump it using the save command. So I have the binary of the game, and I have it in Ghidra as, you know, 386 x86 assembly. So I haven't had a ton of time to look into it, but I'm interested in potentially taking that assembly code and then porting it to be either a native Linux or Windows binary. So obviously a lot of work has to get put in for that to happen. But there's like a big shmup community that could be dedicated, because the same hardware runs a couple Raiden games and this game Viper Phase 1. So those people might be interested in contributing to this kind of project. And also for me, it would be interesting to learn about x86 assembly, because I've only really worked with old CPUs that aren't, you know, Hitachi Super H is now like a microcontroller and 68K is gone. So if I learned x86 assembly, it could be valuable. So, you know, thank you for listening. Wow, this is almost 20 minutes. This is a recap for 2021. I'm hype about all the development efforts for 2022. Probably going to do a lot less ROM hacking, because it just seems like, you know, for all the time I put in, nobody cares. Nobody wants to play what I make. That's fine. So at least, you know, if I make a game on Steam, I can sell it and make $3 a month or something for the rest of my life, and own it, and it's mine. So we'll see what happens. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have a wonderful new year 2021 ahead. Bye-bye.